Cloud. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to have an important informational session today on U.S. Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act. Our instructor today is Terry Homburg. He's comprised a class here that will help guide you through this act and how it affects your business. We're pleased to also have on the line with us Leslie Miller, also from the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. Washington State Procurement Technical Assistance Centers are now called Apex Accelerators. We are a free resource for government contracting assistance, and we are very much happy to help you with any questions that you have regarding government contracts and looking into doing business with the government. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Terry Homburg, who will be kicking off this session on the U.S. Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act. So Terry Homburg, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Give you most of the names that are attending here I'm not familiar with, so I'll give you a little bit of my background. I retired with 29 years of federal procurement experience as a contracting officer with the Department of Defense. My experience is in construction, architect engineering, supply, ship repair, and service contracts, both pre-award and post-award. I also held every position locally in the government-wide purchase card program, which you would know as payments, invoice payments via Visa or MasterCard. I started working with this PTAC office the day after I retired. So I'm going on my fifth year as a PTAC counselor. The goal for this session is for you to become aware of the Act. Some of you are already aware of the Act, the impact on you, and where to turn to seek assistance. As many of you know, there is a contract requirement for liability insurance to work on a federal installation, but many of you know little or nothing about the Act and the insurance to protect you from bankruptcy. So I developed this class. As a contracting officer, I had to deal with this act because I worked at a submarine base and a Navy shipyard where a lot of the work was subject to the act. So I had to deal with it on a week-to-week basis. And I was calling the Department of Labor office for Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act almost every week when I would get new requirements in to find out if it was subject to the act or not. There's a lot of exemptions, and we'll be going through those today in the class. Many federal agencies, contracting officers know little to nothing about the act also. So after today, you'll be able to bring it to their attention and inform them of the act. You can ask questions because we have a small group today. You can ask questions throughout the class, or you can jot them down on the PowerPoint presentation, which you should have already, and we'll address all your questions at the end of the class. There are two handouts that you should have received. One is the PowerPoint presentation. I'm probably one of the few instructors that give it to you before the class as opposed to giving it to you after the class. And my reason for doing that is if you print it out, and as we go through the slides, you can make your own personal notes on each sheet of paper so you can refer to them in the future. And also you can jot down any questions that you might want to ask. The second presentation is a list of the state of Washington navigable waterways. It's how many pages is it? Mine is double-sided. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 7 pages of navigable waterways in the state of Washington. And one day I add these all up. There's 103 of those in the state of Washington. Of course, we're adjacent to the Pacific Ocean, so any work that's done on the coast is subject to the act. We also have the Strait of Juan de Fuca, the Puget Sound. We have lots of lakes and rivers in the state, and they are all subject to the act. So I'm sure we'll have some questions about that, and we'll be going into some details during the class. So before we get started, do any of you have any questions? Any specific things that you want to know or make sure that I cover in the class? All right, so let's let's get started down the road of enlightenment on this act. Page 2. All right, so the agenda for today is give you a little background about the act. When did Congress pass it? The insurance requirements, the impact to you, the employer. When is it applicable? Who to contact when you need help? And we'll have questions and answers at the end. Next slide. All right, so here's a little abbreviation cheat sheet that you can refer to throughout the class and in the days and months and years to come. The first one is the Division of Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act. That is a division that is in each location for the Department of Labor. Our closest one is in Seattle, right across Puget Sound. The Department of Labor is the one that oversees the act. LNHWCA, just a short abbreviation for having to say Longshore and Harbor Workers Compensation Act. I'll call it the act throughout the class. OWCP, Office for Workers' Compensation Programs. PSNS, I refer to as an example in the class. That is the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard located in Bremerton, Washington. And two important terms that you need to be aware of with regards to the act is situs and status. And we will be talking about those. Next slide, background. So the act was passed by Congress in 1927. So that's a long time ago. And the act was expanded by 2 amendments in 1972 and 1984. Here are some examples of situs and status. What the definition of situs is the location of the work. Where is it located? Like the shipyard or the Coast Guard Air Station in Port Angeles. These are 2 locations that are adjacent to navigable waterways, right? So PSNS is on Puget Sound and the Coast Guard Station in Port Angeles is on the Strait of Juan de Fuca, both navigable waterways. So a conversation that always has to take place is any of your employees that are subject to the act, are they working over, on, under, or next to a navigable waterway? If the answer is yes, and the employee is subject to the act, which we will talk about later, then you need to have that specialized insurance to protect you from your employees' claims so you don't go bankrupt. And I'll give you a little story that you can relate to that I actually experienced in my last year of public service as a contracting officer. Company actually went bankrupt. Status is the type of work you are doing. So an example would be a production facility that is supporting vessels that are tied up on a pier on a navigable waterway. My last job, 4.5 years, was out at the Naval Submarine Base Bangor, working for the Naval Facilities Engineering Command. And there are 2 parts to that base. We call it the lower base and the upper base. Lower base is actually on Hood Canal, where the submarines and the service ships are tied up to. And so certainly any work that's being done for those ships by, next to, on, over, on, under, or over the waterway are subject to the act. What a lot of people don't understand is on the upper base, which can be miles away from the navigable waterway, if there's a production facility there, that their purpose is to support the vessels that are tied up down on the lower base, miles away, then workers working in those buildings are also subject to the act. Okay. So that's probably something that we will talk about more as time goes on. So the act provides for compensation, medical treatment, and vocational rehabilitation. This is for the employee, your employees that were working by a navigable waterway. If they get ill, injured, or die, course, there's not going to be any medical treatment or compensation or vocational rehabilitation if they die, but if there's an illness or an injury, the act covers that. Okay, so let's take a pause here. Any questions on CITES status, what the act covers before we move on? All right, let's go on to the next slide. Coverage. Is there a question there? Okay, Melina?
Hello. You mentioned that even if the production of work is being done even miles away, if it's for anything that's going to be operating on navigable waters, it is also under this act.
Right.
Will you go over that a little later?
Oh, yeah. In fact, one of the slides, we talk about one of the exceptions to the act. The courts on the West Coast of the United States interpret the act differently than those courts on the East Coast or the Gulf Coast. And we'll be talking about that.
Okay, I'll save my questions for later then. Thank you.
Yeah. Make sure you make some copious notes on that page when we get to it. All right. Coverage. The act applies to all covered contractor employees, regardless federal, state, county, city, wherever. So a lot of people, or some people, think that because this is a federal act that it will only come into play on federal contracts. That is false. If you are hired by any entity, whether it's a commercial company, private company, a homeowner working on a waterfront on the Hood Canal, or the state of Washington and any of its agencies, any of the cities like Seattle, or counties, King County, the ports, the Port of Seattle, the Port of Tacoma, it doesn't matter. If you have an employee that is performing work on a navigable waterway, by no matter who employs you, the act applies to you. Okay, so very important. So I got a little picture there of the United States. It covers everywhere. Okay, all right. Any questions on that? So it's not just federal contracts. It covers any entity that hires you to do work around, on, over, under, next to a navigable waterway. The act applies to you. Okay. Next slide is insurance requirements. All right, so the act covers employees in traditional maritime occupations such as longshore workers, ship repairers, ship builders or ship breakers, the harbor construction workers. It does not cover vessel crew members. That is covered under the Jones Act. Okay, so the act covers non-maritime workers not covered by state workmen's compensation benefits that perform work on, over, under, next to navigable waterways. Now, the reason why I throw this in here is because labor, the labor and industry in various states, their state laws can vary. Personal experience, state of Washington, when an employee gets ill or injured or dies, the family then can file a claim. And typically, they will file a claim to the state of Washington, L&I, to get compensation. The state of Washington will quickly deny that claim and return it back to the applicant. And the reason why is the state of Washington Labor and Industries does not cover injuries, illness, injuries, or deaths on navigable waterways. Okay, so that's very important. A lot of people don't know that. Employees don't know that. Employers don't know that. Agencies, contracting officers don't know that. So this is why we're doing this class. Okay, so I'll relate to you an experience I had in my last year as a contracting officer out at the Naval Base Bangor, Submarine Base, Washington. There was an employee of a subcontractor who at night was working on the pier down on the Hood Canal. There was a storm that night. There was a ship tied up to the pier. The employee slipped off of the pier, fell into the water between the pier and the ship, and the storm pushed the wave onto the ship, and the ship went up against the pier and crushed the individual who died instantly. The family filed a claim with the state of Washington, L&I. They quickly denied the claim because it was on a navigable waterway. The family found out about the act, called Department of Labor over in Seattle, Washington, and the director and his staff there helped them submit a claim that went directly to the subcontractor. It was a loss of life, it was death, so probably millions of dollars. I don't know the dollar value. And so the act says that in this case, the subcontractor had to pay the claim. It was a legitimate claim. The company ended up selling off their assets in order to pay the claim. So let's give an example and say it was a $3 million claim, loss of life. The company started selling off their assets, sold off all their assets, and still didn't meet the $3 million. Say they got $2 million. And so there was a balance of $1 million on that claim left. Company went bankrupt because they sold all their assets. The act states that when there is still a balance on the claim, the principals of the company are held liable. That means the president, the vice president, the secretary, the treasurer, all the principals in the formation of that company are now personally reliable to pay off the balance of that claim. And so all of those individuals collectively had to come up with another $1 million to pay that claim. Okay, very important. Great example why you need the insurance to protect you from this, because you don't want to go bankrupt. Okay, all right. Examples in Washington of navigable waterways, kind of hinted to this earlier at the beginning: Strait of Juan de Fuca, Puget Sound, Lake Washington, Columbia River, the Chehalis River. For Western United States, it also includes work inland in support of vessels on navigable waterways. So that's what Melina was talking about earlier. The example that I give is there is a naval installation over in the state of Idaho. It's on a lake. They have a production facility there in support of the submarines at the naval base, the Naval Submarine Base Bangor here in Silverdale, Washington, on the Hood Canal. If the employees working in that facility in Idaho on that lake at that installation get ill, injured, or die, they are subject to the act. The courts in the Western United States have interpreted the act to mean or to include facilities not on navigable waterways, but are supporting vessels on navigable waterways. Now, the courts in central United States, the Gulf of Mexico, that'd be Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, all of those, and the states up and down the eastern seaboard do not interpret the act that way. And for them, any inland production facility is not included in their interpretation. It is only those that are working on, over, under, or next to that navigable waterway. If Western United States, if there is an injury, an illness, or a death, like I said, the example is a facility inland, whether it's, anywhere, Spokane, Idaho, Utah, any place. If it's doing work in support of a vessel that is tied up on a navigable waterway, any navigable water, doesn't have to be the Pacific Ocean, doesn't have to be the Strait of Juan de Fuca or the Hood Canal. It could be Lake Washington. It could be the Chehalis River. Those are all navigable waterways. If I noted here, there are 103 navigable waterways in the state of Washington. And so that facility is inland, but in Western United States, the courts have ruled that that activity is in support of a vessel on a navigable waterway. It is subject to the act. Okay. So got to have insurance for those employees also. All right, so if we turn to your second handout, it is the 7 pages of the state of Washington navigable waterways. So it lists on there, and it is the US Coast Guard that maintains the list and also makes the determination if a body of water is a navigable waterway. So if you are in another state, you can look up all the navigable waterways for every state. It also would be important for you when you're putting a cost or price proposal together for your cost of insurance to put it in your proposal. Is that location in that state or in the state of Washington a navigable waterway? And are my employees subject to the act? And if so, then you're going to have to go out to another insurance company, and we'll be talking about that later, to get their rate for your company performing that work so you can include it in your cost proposal. Okay, that's a cost of doing business. Any questions on the handout? I don't even know if you printed it, so there it is. You've got it for future reference. You have all 103 navigable waterways for the state of Washington. I've also provided here the website for all the navigable waterways in the state of Washington. So you can click on that and this will come up. Okay, next slide. Washington Labor and Industries. So if you are an employee, that's what we were talking about earlier, if you're an employee working under next to a navigable waterway and you are hurt or made ill on the job, you are not, underlined, not covered by Washington's workers' compensation. Instead, you may be covered by the federal Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act. Okay. And to find out, then you would call the Seattle office for the West Coast. That's the one closest to us, and talk to the division for the act, and they will answer the questions where that employee is covered or not. We'll be talking about circumstances that are covered by the act, and also lots of examples where the act does not cover work for the employees on particular types of jobs. Any questions on Washington State Labor and Industries? Okay, next page. The impact on you. And this is a big one. If the act applies to you, because there are some employees where the act does not apply. If the act applies to you and you do not have the insurance, and there is a claim due to injury, illness, or loss of life, your company is liable to pay the claim. And if the company has insufficient funds, then the principals are personally liable. That's what we were talking about earlier. Any portion of that you have a question about? So the act has to apply to you. If you don't have the insurance, and if there is a claim, the company is liable to pay the claim. And if once you sell off your assets, there's still a balance left on the claim, then the principals are personally liable to pay the balance. That's why the insurance is so important. That's why I put this class together, because so few people, whether you're contractors or federal agency contracting officers, just don't know about this act. Okay, next page, applicability. So here are some examples that apply to the act. I've listed 3 here. Production buildings supporting vessels. Number 2, the installation of utility systems which provide service to a vessel. And 3rd, the demolition of a facility which is replaced by a production facility. So if you have a contract to do any of these types of things, then you are subject to the act. Your employees are subject to the act. So next is our examples where the work is not subject to the act. And in the shipyard, for example, that's right next to the Puget Sound. And you would think, hey, everything is covered under the act. Well, there are lots of exemptions, and here are quite a few of them. Administrative buildings. So for example, in the shipyard, in the middle of the shipyard is a multi-story building is an administrative building. It's where the commanding officer of the shipyard has his office. Any work in there is exempt. It's an administrative building, okay? Facilities providing retail services like the Navy Exchange, AFES down at Joint Base Fort Lewis McChord, MWR facilities, morale, welfare, and recreation facilities. Those are retail services. They're exempt from the act, okay? Housing, family housing, bachelor enlisted quarters. So any work in the BEQs or family housing is exempt. Garages and parking lots are exempt. Now, on this next bullet, I underlined repairs to utility systems. If you look up above, examples that are applicable, you'll see utility systems, but the difference is installation of utility systems is applicable. Down below, repairs to a utility system is not applicable, okay? So repairs to a utility system, even if they provide service to a vessel. If you're repairing the utility system, not applicable. If you are installing a brand new utility system, it is applicable, okay? Little nuances there. Facilities for unions. So typically at every installation, there are offices for the union representatives. If you're doing work in there, not applicable to the act. Demolition of a facility that is not replaced. So a little nuance here. I did lots of awards of contracts and administered contracts. The difference between a demolition, there's two types of demolitions of facilities. One is they're demolishing the facility and it's just going to be bare ground after that. They're not replacing that building with another building. Okay, so demolition of a facility that is not in place, any work on there, the employees are not applicable to the act. Now, up above, that third bullet there is demolition of a facility which is replaced by a production facility. If that's the case and you're doing work there, your employees are subject to the act. Okay. Down under not applicable, the last two, the delivery drivers. If you buy materials from a vendor and the vendor is going to deliver it to the site, even if it's on the pier or on the dock on a navigable waterway, they are not subject to the act. They are just delivery people. They're delivering it, dropping off, and leaving. Okay, they are not subject to the act. And through an amendment to the act, aquaculture. Anything doing with aquaculture is not subject to the act. That's a head scratcher. Why in the world would employees who are working out on these floats doing fish farming, why are they not subject to the act? Well, there must have been some good lobbyists. They got them out of the act. Okay. Any questions about when it's applicable and when it's not applicable? Melina, did you have your hand up? Okay, go ahead.
Just wanted to clarify what you mean by utility systems.
So putting in the electrical system, typically underground, putting in natural gas, steam systems, shipyard still uses steam. Those are all utilities. Same thing that you would have in your home, the utilities, the electric, the natural gas. What are they?
What about parts of a system?
Excuse me?
What about parts of a system? For example, we always claim it under US knowledge because we're on the vessel when we're installing it, which would apply. We put in some pressure relief valves for safety measure on these barges that carry products, and they wanted that safety measure, and so it's part of their utility of how they're processing their products. But you said that if I'm installing it, then it does apply, but if I'm just creating new, it doesn't.
I'm not sure I understood your question, but let me take a stab at answering it. If it's an existing system and you're putting in a replacing a component, then that's a repair. If it's part of the, the prime contractor is installing a utility system and they've subcontracted out a portion to you to put in a component, but it's all part of the new construction, then that is applicable to the act.
Repairs to the utility system, though, you say do not apply. So if it's a system that's already existing and it needs just because we're metal fabricators, oftentimes it's a replacement of pipe or a leg corroded and we put in brand new fixtures. Would that then not apply?
That would not apply because that's a repair to an existing utility system.
And is there a place?
Not installing a new system, repairing an existing system.
Okay. And is there any place that I can look up these definitions of utility systems to justify?
Yeah, so when in doubt, there's a slide at the end of this class that will give you a point of contact to answer specific questions that you may have.
Okay.
I have these labor categories that are going to be working on this contract, which is next to a navigable waterway. Are they all subject to the act? And that's the question that you'll ask this point of contact information that I give you. And they will go down through the list. They will ask you lots of questions for each one so they can give you a finite, definite answer, yes or no, to help you. But at any point, if after going through the exhaustive list of all your employees, labor categories, whether it's electricians, welders, carpenters, whatever they're doing, if any one of them, the answer is yes, then you're going to be needing the insurance. So then your follow-on question will be, where do I find those insurance companies that provide insurance for the act? And they will provide those for you too. And there are 4 types of insurance, and we can talk about that also.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have a question before we move on? All right, so let's go to the next slide on applicability. This is what we were talking about earlier. The Western United States courts have a wider interpretation of the act, which includes work inland supporting the vessels on a navigable waterway. Examples: if a production building at Sandpoint, Idaho, that's what we was talking about earlier, but I didn't mention Sandpoint, repairs vessel components for the ships at the shipyard in Bremerton, then the workers may be covered by the act. Now, that would not be the case on the East Coast. It is the case on the West Coast. Number 2 example, a production building on the upper base at Bangor, Washington, which is just north of Silverdale, Washington, supports the ships tied up at the pier on the Hood Canal. Then the workers may be covered by the act. Okay, so that's what I was talking about earlier. A couple of miles, upper base, Bangor, the Naval Submarine Base. There's a production building that is repairing or manufacturing or parts for the vessel that's tied up on the Hood Canal. Those employees working in that production building on upper base, which is quite a ways inland, are subject to the act because that is the interpretation of the courts on the West Coast of the United States. Any questions on those examples? All right, so the next slide is who to contact for help. That's what we were just talking about. So when in doubt on the coverage under the act, contact the U.S. Department of Labor, OWCP, office located in Seattle, and I have provided to you 2 phone numbers for their office, and I've also provided the email address for the director of the office, Mr. Todd Brunex. They can refer you to insurance policy holder providers, insurance companies that provide insurance for Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act, because a lot of the companies that you're familiar with that provide general liability insurance to work on a federal installation do not provide insurance to cover you on this act. There's a smaller subset of insurance companies out there, and sometimes they're hard to find. I have clients who contact me and say, I need the insurance for the act. Who do I don't know who to call. No, I say, call the Department of Labor in Seattle and they will refer you. So the West Coast offices are located in Seattle, San Francisco, and Honolulu. All three of those offices are managed by the director, Mr. Todd Brunix. So he spends a third of his time in each of the offices. He's a hard man to get a hold of. I've often asked him to come and do a presentation to an organization or to a conference or whatnot. And sometimes he commits to it, but doesn't show up. And other times he's just too busy, he can't commit to it. But in each of the office, there are 2, 3, or 4 other act attorneys that are in the office all the time. So when you call that number, you are probably not going to talk to Todd, but you're going to talk to one of the attorneys that work in the office. Okay. All right. So keep in mind, there's a couple of reasons why you want to contact the office in Seattle. And I'm talking not knowing where you all are located. I'm just making an assumption that you're in the Puget Sound area or you're in the state of Washington. So your closest office is going to be Seattle, Washington. So you're going to call them to find out, I'm considering submitting a proposal for the award of this contract, or maybe you just got the award of a contract and you know it's around a navigable waterway and you didn't get the insurance and put in your proposal, but boy, you better buy it because you don't want to go bankrupt. So you're calling the Department of Labor in Seattle and one of those 2 phone numbers and getting an attorney on the phone and say, I'm considering this contract, or I have this contract. It's on Lake Washington. And these are the skill sets. These are the people that are going to be coming on site doing the work. And they will go one by one, ask you multiple questions and let you know whether those employees are subject to the act, either full-time or part-time. You know, it can depend. Okay. And then once any one of those labor categories, the answer is yes, it is subject to the act, then your next question is going to be, where do I find the insurance for it? Okay. So having said that, let me tell you, all right, there are 4 types of insurance policies. So on very small jobs, or maybe as a large job, but very few employees are subject to the act, there are what's called nuisance policies. They're small, they're a nuisance. Okay, so there are insurance companies that provide nuisance policies. Another is Washington Assigned Risk Plan is another source for finding insurance. Another is Safe Shore. It is for smaller policies. And lastly, there is American Equity, who provides insurance policies also. So those are 4 different sources that the Department of Labor would refer you to, depending on how much insurance you need. Okay. Moving on, we're down to Q&A. Next slide. Any questions from anybody on anything that we covered, or maybe something that I didn't cover that you have a question about? So after this, we're going to have a little quiz. No questions? All right. So let's go to the next slide. I have 5 questions for you. And you can turn off your microphones and just give me your answers. Question number 1. There we go. The act is only for employees on federal contracts. What is your answer? Yes or no? I see no. I see no. Let's see, who else is hanging out now there? Lawrence, Susan, Marissa, what do you think the answer is? This is a participation class.
Yeah,
Okay.
they've got it. They've got it in the chat here. I'm not sure if you were able to pull it up, but Corey said negative, and Marissa said false, and Susan said no. So I think we've got pretty good consensus on this.
Okay, so this is something we covered at the beginning of the class. The act is not it is not subject to only federal contracts. Like I said, it's if you have an employee working around a navigable waterway, regardless of who employ you, it could be a private party at a residence that needs the bulkhead repaired on the Hood Canal. It could be a state agency, a county agency, a city agency, whatnot. If you are not doing the work yourself as the owner of the company and you're not self-performing it, but you are hiring employees to do the work, you need that protection, having that insurance to protect you from any claims in case they get ill, injured, or die on the job. Okay, question number 2. The act provides for compensation, medical treatment, and vocational rehabilitation. True or false? That is true. It covers all 3 of those things. The act provides for compensation, medical treatment, and vocational rehabilitation. Question number 3. The act covers only contractor employees in the state of Washington. What are our responses for that? False. Marissa said false. Melina is shaking her head. No, it is not only in the state of Washington. And what does Corey say? No, it's the entire state, it's entire United States, correct. Yep, it covers contractors, employees throughout the United States. Question number 4. The principals of a company may be responsible to pay the balance of a claim. Yes, true. All right. Yes, that is true. So after the company sells off all of their assets to pay the claim, if there's still a balance, then the principals are liable to pay the balance. Last question. On the West Coast, the act includes production buildings in Utah and Nevada supporting vessels. True or false? True. Right. Okay, the answer is true. Different from the rest of the United States, on the West Coast, United States courts have interpreted the act to include production buildings inland, regardless. I just gave 2 examples, Utah and Nevada, Idaho, wherever, east side of the Cascade Mountains and Spokane. They are included in the act. Question?
What about U.S. territories such as Guam?
I'm going to defer that question to the Department of Labor in Seattle. Talk to the lawyer to see if the act includes its territories, for which there are many. So we have a lot of U.S. Contractors who win contracts for Guam, Puerto Rico, lots of trust territories. So that is a great question. So if you are contemplating putting a proposal together, working around navigable waterways, in those cases, probably the ocean, then you want to contact the Department of Labor and ask them if the act covers or includes the territories of the United States also. Okay, great question. I was thinking about that question if somebody's going to ask me during the class, and sure enough, my boss asked the question. Okay. All right, so going on to the summary now. Situs and status. So situs is where is the work to be performed, and status is what is the type of work that you're going to be doing. So 2 important key words. And when you talk to the Department of Labor, that's the rabbit holes that they're going to be going down. Situs and status. Okay. So companies have gone bankrupt because they didn't have the insurance. Don't go out of business because you didn't have the insurance. Next slide is some resources. These are actual links that you can click on and go and learn about the Defense Base Act. Defense Base Act is for work in other countries. The Jones Act covers ships crews. OWCP And the next one is the act itself. If you want to learn more about it, you can click on that. It will take you right to the act. And navigable waterways. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a website that identifies the navigable waterways also. Any questions on those resources? All right. So the next couple of slides are just to let you know about my upcoming classes, the schedule for the next year, which starts April 1st. These are a few of my next few classes: April, May, June, and July. Federal Contracts Lexicon, that's learning to speak the right language with the federal contracting officers. So there's a meeting of the minds and understanding. Steps leading to a contract, that's from the very first step to getting registered, getting your NAICS codes and whatnot, and all the steps like putting a price proposal together or reviewing a solicitation, putting a proposal together. What becomes of that proposal gets evaluated by the agency's contracting officer. Time of award, and I throw in 2 bonus steps after contract award also. My class in June is on ethics. A lot of people think there are no ethics in government contracting, but I'm here to tell you there are lots of ethics. There are lots of clauses in a contract, in a solicitation, and the following contract that deal with ethics. So I have a class just on ethics. Cybersecurity with the Department of Defense is a very big deal. And in July is a class dedicated to the socioeconomic certifications, such as woman-owned small business, veteran-owned small business, hub zone, 8A, so on and so forth. Okay, so there's some of the classes that are coming up. The next slide talks about our monthly contract coffee hour. It's the first Wednesday of every month from 8 to 10. There's the website that you can go in, click on it, read about it. If you're interested in attending, it's a free registration. And the day before the contract coffee hour, you're sent the Zoom link, click on it, and you're in. So it's an open conversation. Any questions you have on government contracting, talk about capability statements, events that are coming up, like last week was Alliance Northwest. So the 2 months prior to Alliance Northwest, we prepare you for Alliance Northwest. What to do, how to navigate, getting your capability statement ready, your elevator pitch, get to practice all of that kind of stuff. Okay, and the last event there on that previous slide is Wednesdays with the deputies for small business. So once a month, we get the small business liaison officers from each of the local government agencies together. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 local federal agency small business specialists in our local area in Kitsap County. So it's a meeting with the deputies to find out how to do business with NAVC, Defense Logistics Agency, NAVSUP, Naval Facilities Engineering Command. How do I do business with you? What do you buy? Is it construction, supplies, service contracts, IT, professional services, whatever? How do we do business with you? So that's a great event that takes place every month, the last Wednesday of the month. I think that changes occasionally due to schedules from 10 to 11:30 each morning. Okay. Also very important for me, the next slide is we will be sending you a post survey tomorrow. There are 5 questions. The first 3 are mandatory. I would really appreciate it if you would fill that out. I will review those, and I'm always looking for making improvements to my classes. So please respond to that. That really helps me. And lastly is, if you're not currently a PTAC client, this is how you can become a PTAC client. If you are in Kitsap County in the state of Washington, you would send an email to James Davis, who is facilitating the class here, flipping the pages, or you can call him at that phone number. If you're not in Kitsap County, but you are in the state of Washington, you go to the website washingtonptac.org and sign up to get a counselor assigned to you. And if you are outside of the state of Washington, then you go to aptac.us.org and register for a client, and the PTAC organization in that state will assign you the closest counselor to you. So they're all, we've got you covered anywhere in the United States. PTAC is everywhere, okay? And it's free because it is partially funded for us, by the state of Washington here, and also by the Department of Defense. So everything that we offer is free, except for bid match, which is a break even $135 a month for you to get solicitations from over 1,600 websites.
And
That's the end of my presentation.
awesome. Thank you, Terry. Just a quick note, bid match, I believe, is $165 a year. So it's even less expensive than that amount. And then additionally, we have one more event. It happens on the second Wednesdays of the month. The first one is actually happening in April. So that's April 12th, and it's called Prime Connect. And that's where we connect prime contractors with subcontractors interested in doing government work, but maybe not interested in winning prime contracts. This next one will be primarily focused on construction and roadway work, and also some of the fish passages that we've been the projects that have been coming through Washington. So we'd invite you to check that out on eCenter. You can get registered there for that. I'd highly encourage it, especially if you're in that arena. All right. Well, that concludes our class today. Without any questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Oops, Terry?
There's at least one question
Yeah.
in the chat. Let's cover that. Question
Oh yeah,
is,
look at that. Does USL NH the Longshore Harbor Act prohibit injured employees from filing suits against the employer?
filing a suit, I'm interpreting that as submitting a claim. So you would go through the closest location is the Seattle Department of Labor, the division for the act, talk to the attorneys there, and they will act on your behalf and submit a claim, help you submit a claim to the employer for which you were working around a navigable waterway and you are subject to the act, and submit that claim. Did I answer the question? Did we interpret the question correctly? Yes. Okay, it's a win. Any other questions? Let's look up above and see if there's any other questions. Did somebody make a comment there? Like some Amish. There's a big one.
Go ahead, Melina.
Okay, cool. And it might be directed towards my insurance, but so we use Safe Shore, and we obviously, before the year starts, we guesstimate about how much we'll need in coverage based on our previous years and potential upcoming projects. So we kind of cover it throughout the year, and then we do an audit. What happens is, in the audit, we're often asked for 941 tax forms that apply to all of our payroll that goes out, and we always have to say, hey, can we edit the audit to show just our labor for USLNH? And it's a back and forth for like 3 months. I'm wondering if there's like a streamline, or if you've heard of other things like this between for the company, for ourselves, just streamlining the difference between the USLNH stuff and LNI. Are people maybe doing 2 separate payrolls completely? I'm just curious about your input on that.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with that. I know it can be frustrating, and typically when you work with the federal government, you're keeping, the old humor is having multiple accounting books, multiple books of accounting, and it's true. And the reason for it is indirect costs is a great example. Your indirect cost rate is different for the federal government than it is for private industry. And the reason for that is there are things that you can include in your indirect cost in private industry that the federal government does not allow. And so as a result, you end up with two different indirect rates. So when you put a cost proposal together for a federal contract, whether you're the prime contractor or a subcontractor, your overhead rate is going to be lower than it is for private industry. Say it's 13.5%. But in private industry, you're able to include bad debt and parties with alcohol and things like that. So the Fed's rate is 13.5%. And for commercial industry, it might be 14.2%. Two sets of books. You got to maintain them. So if you're interested in doing federal contracting, you're going to have, like, the big companies have a department that all they do is federal contracts, and then another department that does all other, or maybe the state. So that's why it takes a lot of people to do federal contracting. It's a big bureaucracy. All right. There's a question here. Let's see. My company got a small dispute earlier this year regarding Lake Sammamish. Lake Sammamish used to be logged and tugged out to the sound, which is navigable, but no longer can be navigable. In this case, we provided history one. We proved history won the case. What is your opinion? What is my opinion? Well, I guess I would start and look up to see if Lake Washington is on the 7 pages as a navigable waterway. I'm going to guess that it is. So a lot of this goes back to when we had the fur traders and trappers and the Indians and their canoes doing commerce on water. So if they were able to paddle their canoe with the hides and furs and go upstream or downstream to another community and sell their wares or trade, that's a navigable waterway. So I'm assuming Lake Sammamish is still a navigable waterway. But let's take a look here. Sammamish. I'm not seeing it on the list. So I may be reading the list wrong, but certainly you can take a look at the list too. So what is the question here? What is my opinion as to whether Lake Sammamish is a navigable waterway? Is that the question? Can unmute your mic and follow up with me. Okay, well, I'm going to assume that the question is answered then. So somebody asked a question about Guam, which we talked about. Answers to the questions, true and false.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, that's what we're here for.
So we have an administration building here. And those of us inside the building are covered by the state act, or excuse me, L&I. But I'm wondering about those who work in the yard primarily, and it's on Lake Union. Many of them who are exclusively working in the yard, we've applied to the state. Just looking for your thoughts on that.
When you say the yard, you're talking about the shipyard on the Lake Union?
Well, it's not a shipyard. It's basically on the property where our shop is and the administration building. There are, pieces of equipment out there. Our barges are also, well, they're beyond the yard on the water.
Okay, so your office is on waterfront on Lake Union. And your question is, your employees who work in the building, are they doing work on your property on the waterfront?
No, well, so we do have, like myself, I work inside the building. And so I know that I'm L&I and my coworkers up here, but it's, for instance, we have a mechanic and he works on, the various pieces of equipment that are in our yard, as well as the barges. And we've been having him on the state on L&I, except for if he goes out to a job site and he's on a vessel. We also have MEL and USLH coverage. So my question is about when, for instance, the mechanic is working here, in our yard, should he be on the state or should he be something else?
My experience is that he would be covered by the act. And that if he were to get ill, injured, or God forbid, die, while he was working, you gave him an assignment to do work on the barge or something on the waterfront, that I believe that he would be subject to the act. And if the family or he was to submit a claim to the state of Washington, they would probably disapprove it because it's on navigable waterway. Now, to get to the definitive answer, I would have you turn to the slide for your point of contact, phone numbers and email address for the Seattle Department of Labor office to specifically ask that question. Certainly, you don't want to learn about it after the fact when you could be financially harmed. So I would advise you to give them a call and ask the pointed questions to find out if he is covered under the act. And if so, then you need to have insurance for him under the act.
Yeah. He did have something, but I think it happened in the shop and he was covered by the state. So it seems, I guess it depends where he is.
Yeah.
Another question.
Situs and status.
Yeah, right. I was also curious about principals again, being personally liable.
Yeah.
And you mentioned like a treasurer and vice president. Would it include all or any officer of the company? Do you know?
So typically, if a company is incorporated, in their incorporation documents, they identify the principals by title and name. Those would be the principals that would be held liable. Now, you have LLCs, you have sole proprietorships, there's all kinds of organizations for businesses. Under those circumstances, well, sole proprietor, it would be the sole proprietor. The owner is then responsible for the balance. After he sold off all of his assets, he went bankrupt, and now still a balance. Well, now he has to pay the balance personally, liable for the balance of that claim. In an LLC, I'm not sure. That would probably be best answered by the attorneys, by the Department of Labor office in Seattle.
Okay.
Great questions. Bring on the questions. That's what I'm here for.
So, Terry, just a quick notice on all of the work that they're doing on the Olympic Peninsula and the fish passages. I was just doing a little research on here, and the Hump Tulips River is navigable. And, so, I just wonder if the guys at Kiewit know this.
I would think so, because Kiewit is a company that I've awarded contracts to and administered. They are a big construction company.
Yeah.
They have been around for a long time, but that doesn't mean they know everything.
Well, and, so if I'm a subcontractor there, I would think that Hewitt would want to educate and inform all the subcontractors about this also.
Maybe, maybe not, because they're trying to get the best price. So if the subcontractor is unaware of the requirement and he doesn't go out and get that insurance premium and include it in his cost proposal, then the prime contractor is getting the job for less money. But if that subcontractor has an employee working on the river who gets injured, ill, or God forbid dies, that subcontractor is going to have a claim from the Department of Labor, subject to the act, and that they're going to have to pay it. And hopefully, if they don't have the insurance, they've got lots of assets that they can sell and not go bankrupt.
And just to clarify, we don't know that Kiewit wouldn't, you know, but I want to assume positive intent on Kiewit's behalf. We you know, they very well may just try to make sure that everybody's taken care of and say, hey, don't forget to include this. We're just saying that in general, it is on the subcontractor's plate to be aware of this, because ignorance can hurt you.
Yep. In most cases, a lot of these small businesses are unaware of the act.
Yeah.
And that's why I prepared this class.
And so on a side note, Kiewit will be at Prime Connect on April 12th. So if you are interested in seeing what they're doing, and they've got a multi-billion-dollar project with the fish passages, not million, right? I said million. They are interested in getting subcontractors for lots of that work. So so make sure to join us on April 12th.
Perfect.
Well, any follow-up questions, any final comments or concerns or questions that we can answer prior to wrapping it up today?
Well, like I said, this is one of my shorter classes, but it is very important, and every slide was impactful.
All right, you guys. Well, we'll go ahead and call it a day. This was recorded. It will be available on the Kitsap Economic Development Alliance's YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you in our next class.
And do complete the post survey for me.
Terry, so much for the resources.